Patrick McGinty of 14 Castle Road, Camden Town, London?
That's correct.
And you are a landscape gardener?
Yes.
Mr. McGinty, do you know Mr. Broad?
No, sir. I've never met him in my life.
Mr. McGinty, did you not meet Mr. Broad at the Oak Grove Greyhound Stadium on the 2nd of May?
Except at Oak Grove, sir, on that day.
But not before that?
Only in a pub, sir, in Camden Town.
So you did not know him well?
Oh, no, sir, no. I was introduced to him.
How many times did you meet him before you met him at the stadium?
At the stadium. That's correct, sir. Yes.
But before that, Mr. McGinty, how many times?
Before that?
Before that, yes. Once?
Once, yes. That would be about it. Not more.
And did Mr. Broad suggest to you that you go to Oak Grove Stadium that day?
Oh, not at all. I went on my own, like me and some of my mates.
How many of you?
Well, about 20 of us set off and about 10 of us got there.
And who suggested that you should go there?
No one suggested it.
Well, how did it happen then?
We all went down there in the bus.
Were these other men working at landscape gardening?
Well, there was about a dozen on the garden and a couple of brickies and their mates and so on. But there was nothing underhand or out of the way about it.
No, I'm sure there was not, Mr. McGinty. How did you get there?
Aye, well, the weather was terrible that day. You couldn't lay a brick. And so we set off and with a good afternoon. Boys and boys, with a really good afternoon.
Mr. McGinty, how did you get to the stadium?
In the lorry.
Mr. McGinty, am I to infer that you and 20 was it of your fellows abandoned your work without asking leave from anyone in authority, instead went down to a dog racing stadium in a vehicle belonging to the firm? Now, have I followed your testimony correctly?
There was nothing underhand about it, Your Honour.
Were you given permission for this exercise?
Permission? But I'm sorry, I'm completely lost, Your Honour.
Did you ask for leave from your work?
We backed the dogs that we fancied, and no question.
Oh, please try to understand me, Mr. McGinty. Was there a foreman in charge?
There was, sir.
And did he give you leave?
He did, sir. He come with us. But he didn't tell us what to back.
Go on, Mr. Ingrams.
But I would like to make it quite clear to Your Honours, we was never told at any time what to back.
Yes, sir. We have taken your point, Mr. McGinty. Thank you. Now, when you and your companions arrived at the track, were you met by Mr. Broad?
No.
Did you see Mr. Broad at any time during the afternoon?
No.
Did you receive money or receive any instructions from anyone during the course of the afternoon?
Well, I won a bit and I lost a bit, and that was about the size of it.
Do you remember what you backed in the 340 race?
There are 6 dogs, sir, and they all look much the same to me.
But can you not remember, Mr. McGinty?
No, sir. I do, Nan. Of course I do, yes. I mean, the 340... I had a good bet on the 340 race for a mate. This mate of mine, he went home a couple of months ago. Now he had a good tip. Now, this man had Monaghan, he had a good tip. And when he had a good tip, he went in strong, you know. I don't know if any of you fellas have been to the dogs here. No, I don't suppose you have. Well, it can be a terrible job, just getting the money on. You know, it's that slow, And this mate of mine, he said, he gave me a few quid and he asked me to get it on for him. The 340 race, of course I remember. But I do not remember the name of the dogs now.
This was on a forecast, was it not?
It was, sir. And this was a tip that he'd had, and I got it on for him. Like you would yourself, you know, for a mate.
Did the tip come from anyone that you know?
No, sir. It was quite inside, if you understand me.
Thank you, Mr. McGinty.
Mr. McGinty, did you block a window of the tote at Oak Grove Stadium between 3:20 and the start of the 3:40 race?
Well, you can't bet 2 at a time, that's certain.
Yes, but did you block this window deliberately?
Well, when I was betting at the window, I was blocking the window deliberately or not.
Mr. McGinty, the point of counsel's question was, I think, quite clear. Were you occupying the window of the totalisator in order to prevent other people from using it? Or were you genuinely betting?
Oh, I was genuinely betting, Your Honour. On behalf of Mr. Monaghan, who is now going back home, sir.
Well, who gave you the money to back on this race?
Mr. Monaghan himself, sir.
And did Mr. Monaghan, who is unfortunately unable to be with us today, also give your companions money to bet with?
Some of them, I think, sir, but I would not like to be emphatic.
No. Now, you've told us that you were genuinely betting for the whole time that you occupied the tote window. Now, for how long was that?
Oh, well, I didn't time it, sir, but it was a good while.
Was it the whole time between the end of the 320 race and the start of the 340?
Oh, no, not the whole time, sir, but a good bit of it.
Now, you've told us that you met Mr. Broad at Oak Grove on that afternoon.
That's correct, sir. And I met him in the pub in Camden Town. And if I said 3 words to him on both occasions, I'd be astonished.
And did he seem to know Mr. Monaghan?
He did exchange a few words with him.
I put it to you, Mr. McGinty, that you and your companions went down to Oak Grove Stadium on that afternoon at the suggestion of Mr. Monaghan.
Am I to answer that?
Just answer as to whether you agree that that was the case.
And what's he asking? I mean, like, I've got to know what I'm committing myself to.
Did you go to Oak Grove Dog Racing Stadium at the suggestion of Mr. Monaghan?
Well, Mr. Monaghan was the foreman, sir.
Well, is that relevant?
Oh, you had to do what he said.
Well, did he suggest that you went to the dog racing stadium that afternoon?
No, Your Honour. There seems to be a good deal of concern here. How and why and all the crossing the I's and dotting the T's of how we went to this meeting. And I'm sure you've got your reasons for it. So look, I'll tell you. Look, I'm going to put you in the picture just as clear as I can. Now, would you like that?
I've no further questions, my lord.
No further questions, my lord.
You may go.
That concludes the case for the defence, my lord.
Members of the jury, it is the submission of the prosecution in this case that there was a conspiracy to manipulate the totalisator odds on the 2nd of May. That is to say, there was collusion, it was premeditated, it was planned in advance, and it did not happen spontaneously. The second part of our case is that this conspiracy was dishonest by any acceptable definition of the concept of honesty. Now, you may say that we're dealing in a twilight world where everyday standards do not apply, but in doing so, you would be ducking the issue. It is precisely in the areas where dishonesty and corruption are most likely to occur that they must most rigorously be stamped out when they do. Now let us look at the claims that we would not convict this defendant of fraud because the bookmakers are such a lot of frauds themselves. Now clearly I suggest that this is an untenable position. Even if it were true, far better to bring the bookmaker to book than to sanction a gluttonous anarchy by ignoring this fraud. And anyway, is it true? The bookmaker, after all, is only Lady Luck's physical manifestation, is therefore bound to get his shins kicked. As to the rather, well, I'm tempted to say, embarrassingly naive claims by the defence that this was not a conspiracy, but a see you there if you happen to be able to make it kind of arrangement. Well, if the enterprise was an abject failure, one might have more time for this explanation. But in the light of the outcome, members of the jury, I suggest that there is only one conclusion that you can come to, and that is that there was forethought and extremely careful planning involved in this enterprise. And I suggest, therefore, your only verdict is one of guilty.
Members of the jury, let us be very clear that what happened on the 2nd of May was a gamble. There was no certainty as to the outcome. Had those 2 dogs not come first and second, and remember there are 29 other permutations that could have occurred, Mr. Broad would have lost £1,000 and he would not be before you today. Now, what is a gamble? An Archdeacon of Westminster once defined it rather well, I think, as a process by which a man seeks to lay hold of his neighbour's goods without making any equivalent return. And yet that is the very process to which my learned friend would have you apply the normal standards of immutable honesty. Now, make no mistake, members of the jury, the bookmaker is out for the punter's cash. Mr. Charles chose to accept Mr. Broad's wager in full. Indeed, he seems to have regarded it as something of a challenge. And when the coin falls on the side of the punter, we must surely applaud. not to convict. As to the question of conspiracy, my learned friend chose to pour scorn on the defendant's description of the informality of the arrangement, presumably because he has no arguments with which to discredit it. But I suggest to you, members of the jury, that it is not at all difficult to conceive of arranging to meet a group of people if they can make it. I know that I have done so, and I'm sure that many of you recall instances when you have done so too. And as to the charge of dishonesty, the manageress of the totalizator herself testified that there was nothing dishonest, nothing illegal in what Mr. Broad did as far as the totalizator was concerned. And above all, and in conclusion, I would ask you to appreciate that in Mr. Broad we are dealing with a man of immense skill and perception where gambling is concerned. And anything in gambling which is the result of such skill and perception, whilst retaining the necessary and essential element of uncertainty, cannot, in my submission, be dishonest. I therefore ask you to return a verdict of not guilty.
Now, members of the jury, you and you alone are the sole judges of the questions of fact. I am here, it is my duty, to instruct you as to the law. Now, the offence of conspiracy to defraud was not created by statute, but has its origins in the history of the common law. Conspiracy is no more than a common agreement or common design. Now, the prosecution says that this agreement was reached at the earliest at a public house in Camden Town, and at the latest at the racecourse itself. And even on the defendant's own account of the matters here, you may well feel that there has been some acting in concert. Now, the conspiracy must be to defraud, and defrauding has two elements. First, there is the element of obtaining something from the person to be defrauded, and second, of causing him to act to his own disadvantage. Now, the prosecution say that the person to be defrauded was Mr. Charles, and it's quite clear from the evidence that in this case the totalizator could not be defrauded. Now, we come to the last and most important part of this offence, and that is the question of dishonesty. Now, the defendant says, what I did was not dishonest, it was no better and it was no worse than goes on in dog racing at any time. Well, what is honest, what is dishonest? That is for you to decide. You set the standards, and those standards are the standards of right-thinking people. If you feel certain that the defendant acted dishonestly, then you must convict. But if you are not sure, well, then you must acquit. Because I must remind you, it is the duty of the prosecution to prove its case beyond all reasonable doubt. Well, members of the jury, will you kindly retire now to consider your verdict?
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find the accused William Broad guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Oi, Ronnie, pick any two.
Mr. Justice Campbell sentenced William Broad to 3 years' imprisonment. Next week, a chance for you to join another jury in assessing the facts when our cameras return to the Crown Court.